Welcome. I'm speaking on behalf of Carolina Jews for Justice. We're dedicated to making this a safe and a welcoming space. For this reason, tonight's event is a weapons-free function. No weapons, including concealed, are permitted on the premises, regardless of permits. Photography, video, or audio recording is not allowed at any time. We also ask all attendees to act respectfully toward others. Disrespect, intimidation, or harassment of any kind will not be tolerated, and will result in your immediate removal. It's a full house. If there's an open seat between you and the person nearby, please move over to fill the gap and make it easier for others to find a seat. Thank you for being here tonight and for helping us maintain a space grounded in safety, dignity, and care for one another. A CJJ safety team is on site, ready to assist you should you need them.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. What a privilege to be with all of you. My name is Billy Jonas. I live here in Asheville. Some of you know me from my work with adults, my singer-songwriter work, or my work with Abraham Jam, the Interfaith Trio, with David Lamont and Dawood Warnsby, and David will be here later. And some know me through my work for families and young folks, some through Camp Bangin' and Sangin'. The through line through all that stuff is that I'm an ordained irreverent, which is, it goes with my T-shirt. I believe everybody has a T-shirt with a message on it, and that sort of broadcasts your ethos, your essence. And my T-shirts would say, "Let's play." Yeah, that's what guides me through all those musical endeavors and playing at the synagogues. And I think every one of you has a T-shirt too. So I want you to think about what your T-shirt would say while we do our first song. What's your essence? What's your ethos? What's the thing that you would broadcast? Maybe the thing that brought you here tonight. We'll come back to that. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. Those are the words. We're going to do them together, but let me sing them first. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. It goes. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. Now when I do that double strong, that's a double clap. You ready? Double clap. Here it comes. You got it. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. Now, raise a hand if you have ever had somebody help you clean your house. Hands down. Raise a hand if you have ever cleaned your house before you had somebody come to help you to clean your house. That's what this song is about. And it's sort of like a way of preparing ourselves for tonight's talk. So we say, open all the doors and windows, let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows, coming on through, sing it with me. Open all the doors and windows, let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows, coming on through. It's a brand new day. Welcome to your brand new place. I love the way you found your way. You made yourself a sacred space. You're standing on solid ground. You fit into your frame just right, but it's gonna tumble down. If you're holding on too tight, you know that's right. So open all the doors and windows, let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows, coming on through, sing it with me. Open all the doors and windows, let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows, coming on through. When the joy begins, how you gonna sort it through? Because when you let the world come in, you let the leaves in too. Now you go clean and sweep and hang on to the precious ones. Wisdom in the things you keep. to put up in the morning sun. So much fun to open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through a little louder. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. We're calling on the winds of change. The winds of hope to bring a healing rain. May we all get soaked. Here's the cold, wet truth. It's hard to warm it on your own. Welcome in a friend or two, and now you've made yourself a home. They can help fill the gaps, add a little extra room, show you when to look out back in time to see the garden bloom. None too soon to open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. Last time singing. Open all the doors and windows. Let the world move through you. Open all the doors and windows. Coming on through. Beautiful job. Thank you. All right, close your eyes for just a moment if you're willing. If you did get a name for what you'd put on your t-shirt, just bring it in right now. What's your t-shirt? What's the thing that you would broadcast to the world, your essence, in your brightest moments? You know, we've all got probably several t-shirts, the one we wear in our darkest moments too, but in your brightest moment. All right, hopefully you got something, because I'm going to ask you to tell somebody what it is. Open your eyes. Would you turn to someone maybe that you don't know and tell them what your t-shirt is? Maybe your name too. Go ahead. All right. You know, there are places you can go on the internet to just get one t-shirt printed, so you could do it after tonight. And after tonight, when we're outside in the lobby, I look forward to hearing what you chose as your t-shirt. I'd like to invite my friend David Lamont to come on out. David wore his shirt. It says, "To get there." Yeah.
I'm just really glad I didn't wear the one that says Under Armour.
Well, we're all here in the spirit of understanding, communicating, and connecting tonight. And now that you've opened all the doors and windows, your minds and your hearts, your eyes and your ears, I hope that metaphor was clear. Now that you've opened them and all sorts of things are coming in, the leaves and the bugs, the poet Rumi has some things to say about all those guests that come in, because tonight during our conversation, you may have some guests show up, the guests inside of you that maybe are not the highest versions of yourself that you'd like to express. Like when I was in the car this morning taking Layla to school, and she talked so soft I could barely hear her, and I really was the 150th time I've said, "Layla, could you speak so I could hear you?" And I could have been kinder. I had the guest of frustration show up at that moment. But because I sing this next song over and over in my off hours, I quickly regrouped. Here's the song. Here's what Rumi says about all those guests. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrow. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrow. Who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for something. Echo. This being human is a guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. This being human is a guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. Every morning a new arrival. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Greet them at the door, laughing. Invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Be grateful for whoever comes. Each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Like when I was on my way to the airport the other day, and a FedEx truck passed our house, delivering packages on the same route that we were following to the airport. We started on our small street, Salem Avenue, up in North Asheville. We pulled out of the driveway, he passed us, we were right behind him, he stopped. Ran to deliver a package. My wife and I breathed deep. He ran back, got in the car, and we said, thank you. He got in his truck. He pulled 3 doors down and stopped again. Well, there's room for 2 cars. He was parked just enough to the middle that we couldn't get around, and we tried. The gift of righteous indignation and the guest of righteous indignation showed up. Now we're thinking we might be late. We took a deep breath, he pulled away, went 7 more doors and stopped again. This time the street was even wider, but there was a car parked. And he pulled right next to that car, so there was no way to get around him. So the guest of murderous intent showed up. And I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we shook our heads because it's, the rule of 3s, and then we knew. Then we knew. We knew. This being human is a guest house. Yes, guest house. Every morning a new arrival. This being human is a guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. Every morning a new arrival. The guest house. Thank you. I'll be unplugging now.
Everyone, please join me in thanking Billy Jonas again for opening the program so beautifully. Good evening, all. My name is Sonia Marcus, and I'm your neighbor here in Asheville since 2013, and I'm a proud board member of Carolina Jews for Justice, the organization bringing you this event. Guided by Jewish values, CJJ combines advocacy and education to organize a nonpartisan Jewish voice for justice in North Carolina. On behalf of all the members of our statewide board, as well as the CJJ staff, I'd like to welcome you to this event. We are so glad that you're here. I want to also recognize a few special guests we have with us tonight. Our beloved Asheville Mayor, Esther Manhire, thank you for joining us. I'd also like to thank 3 more of our current CJJ board members who drove up from the other parts of the state. Cheryl Lester, our board co-chair, Jennifer Sosensky, CJJ's board secretary, and Herb Baum, our current treasurer. Thank you all. Thank you to Asheville community member Lauren Steiner for being a very important part of bringing this event to life. I also want to recognize our local Jewish institutional leaders for their feedback and input, both critical and supportive, as all the pieces were coming together. It's not an easy time to be a Jewish person in a public leadership role. We'd like to thank every single one of you for your service. Big thanks to all the members of our community safety team who have come together to offer the best possible event we can. I feel very lucky to be here myself. On the date when this program was originally scheduled to take place, I was still in Jerusalem, wrapping up 3 months of protective presence work in the region. Peter's work was front and center for me during that time, and I had the pleasure of hearing him speak about his new book back in December. It's mind-boggling to consider how much has happened in the intervening months. May all those most impacted by violence and fear find safety. May all those with broken hearts find solace. Tonight is not about the late breaking news developments, however, as concerning as they are. It's an opportunity for all of us in this room and those joining us online to gather, pause, and consider the larger Jewish whole and the way that we relate to it across our differences. This could never be a stagnant or one-off snapshot assessment. Who we all are as Jews today, both individually and collectively, is constantly evolving. But it does not shift at the speed of a news headline or a Facebook post. These currents run deeper and slower, and they require sustained attention in order to reveal their dynamics and insights. Toward that end, tonight we get to listen in on a live conversation between 2 fascinating Jewish human beings who have had to navigate states of both belonging and othering from their very earliest days. You will no doubt find yourself, as Billy said, in various states of residence or lack of residence during the course of the exchange. All thoughts and emotions are welcome here. And there is so much to learn from shared spaces, even when we don't agree. However, we do request respectful attention from our audience during this exchange. A member of our community safety team will escort anyone out of the theater who acts to disrupt the event. Thank you all for being part of our brave space. Okay, so let's move ahead with the program. Herb and Cheryl and Jennifer and I will all be here at the end of the event to greet you if you'd like to connect before or after getting your books from Malaprops signed by Peter. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Mark Bodgkiss, who currently serves as CJJ's Communications Director and Triad Area Organizer. Thank you all, and thank you, Mark.
Good evening. Thank you, Sonia, for this opening. And can we maybe give a little round of applause for Billy and David? That was so good. My heart was beating a little bit faster before they came on, and I'm feeling a lot more comfortable. I hope you guys are too. As Sonia said, my name is Mark Botchkis. I'm the Communications Director and Shrine Organizer at Carolina Jews for Justice. It is my immense honor and pleasure to be moderating this evening's conversation. Asheville, it is really good to be with you. Before I introduce our esteemed panel, I'd love to say just a few short words about why we're all here this evening. We came here tonight to talk about community. As Jews, we disagree, and that's okay. Arguing, debating, examining ideas and circumstances from every angle is at the very core of who we are. It is the norm, not the exception, for most Jewish communities, if not every single one of them. That being said, something does feel different about this current moment. We are roughly 2.5 years removed from the demoralizing Hamas attack on October 7th, 2023. We are 2.5 years into a brutal response in Gaza by Israel. We are a little more than a year into the second Trump administration. We're 1.5 weeks into the latest war in Iran, which has quickly spread into a burning regional conflict. Friends, it's hard to find the words to describe all of this happening. And because of that, I think our ability to talk to one another productively and with empathy is maybe eroding a bit. And I think it's been happening for quite a while. There are times we're struggling to come together at the dinner table, at the Seder table, at the Thanksgiving table. We are struggling as families, as congregations, and as entire communities. But we have been here before as a people. What tonight is about is relocating our ability to hold multiple truths and differing perspectives. Tonight is about finding our way back to each other. We are here to reopen the conversations we are turning away from. And to help us do that, we have tonight with us Peter Beinart and Rabbi Sandra Lawson. A frequent contributor to the New York Times and an MS Now analyst, Peter Beinart is a professor of journalism and political science at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY. He's also the editor-at-large of Jewish Currents, and he writes the Beinart Notebook. QR codes for Beinert's Notebook are outside, so I hope you guys use those to sign up. And of course, Peter is also the author of Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. Rabbi Sandra Lawson is a nationally recognized leader, visionary strategist, and community builder working at the intersection of Judaism, justice, and community transformation. As the executive director of Carolina Jews for Justice, she brings her passion for equity, commitment to grassroots organizing, and visionary leadership to Jewish communities across our state. She's also my colleague, and I get bonus points for that. One is an expert in news and analysis with a national and international focus. The other is an expert in Jewish thought, specifically here in North Carolina and elsewhere, and the representative is trained in having difficult conversations. So, without further ado, let's welcome Peter and Sandra with a warm round of applause as well. Okay, let's get to know you two a little bit better, if that's okay. I'm going to ask an individual or unique question, a version of this question of what does it mean to be an American Jew in this particular moment in time in human history? Peter, if it's okay, I'll start with you. Your last book, which I mentioned, explores the moral implications for the American and worldwide Jewish community following Israel's brutal dehumanizing campaign of destruction in Gaza. The views you express land you outside of the Jewish norm, as described by the Jewish establishment, let's say. You've also been on the road on your book tour, talking to lots of folks. So how does it feel to show up as you at different communities, Jewish communities that you get to visit?
Thank you. Well, I really am honored to be here, and I just wanted to say briefly before I answer that question, I suspect there are people in the audience who are going to very strongly disagree with some of the things that I'm going to say, and I am always so grateful when people who do disagree come to listen. I feel like one of the biggest problems we have in the American Jewish community and in America in general is that people generally frequently only go to listen to people who ratify what they already believe. It says in Pirkei Avot, in the Mishnah, who is wise? The one who learns from all people. And so I feel like the person who's traveling the furthest ideological distance to listen to someone they disagree with is showing the greatest degree of wisdom. So if that person is you, then thank you. You're the person I'm most grateful to hear. I think that I didn't expect to hold the political views that I hold now, 20, 10, maybe in some ways even 5 years ago. They were an evolution. And the evolution has been challenging and painful in some ways because my politics don't sync up very well with the Jewish communities in which I have built my family and my life. The communities in which I raise my kids, the synagogue that I go to, are the modern Orthodox synagogue. It's not a place that leans on the far left by any stretch. My views are really a really small minority. And in some ways that's been hard because I've had to face very up close the disappointment and even anger of people who have been extremely important in my life and in the life of my family. On the other hand, I'm really grateful for those relationships because they keep me humble and they remind me that even if I strongly disagree with with political views of some of the people around me, I know them so well as human beings that I know the fallacy of trying to make a totalizing moral judgment about someone based on their political views. That many of the same people whose views I might think were not morally appropriate to what Israel did in Gaza. I see in so many other aspects of their lives how much empathy and kindness they show. And it just reminds me that human beings are really complex. We are all much more than our political opinion. I think on the other hand, the evolution of my political views from views that were pretty kind of mainstream in the kind of American Jewish establishment to now ones that are kind of quite off the derech, as we might say, has also led to a whole new series of relationships that I never would have really imagined. A lot of those relationships are with Palestinians, which have been really transformative for me, as I had to kind of confront my own like deeply rooted dehumanization of Palestinians, where I kept meeting Palestinians and thinking, well, surely sooner or later I'm going to meet some Palestinian who really wants to kill me and really has some innate hatred of Jews, and thinking, well, I still haven't met that person. But I've also had the chance to meet a lot of particularly younger American Jews, who I think are really searching in really moving and powerful ways for trying to create Jewish communities and a Judaism that fits their ethical values. And I actually think that in this moment of immense division and pain and fear, we're actually seeing a kind of rebirth in American Jewish life, a huge amount of institutional creativity by people who are searching for a Judaism that they believe honors the basic understanding that all human beings are created equal in the image of God, when they don't necessarily see that reflected in the Jewish communities in which they were raised. And I think that out of that is going to come, and is already coming, really extraordinary, really vibrant forms of Jewish life. And I'm privileged to get a kind of front row seat at it.
Thank you for that. Sandra, You are a Black queer woman rabbi. In this role, you regularly confront stereotypes about who gets to call themselves a rabbi and who is seen as Jewish. You also do a good bit of traveling and speaking to many different communities. So what is it like for you to show up as your Jewish self in Jewish spaces?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all so much for being here. Um, I, I arrived at this job in June, and I came to Asheville in August. I met many of you all, and I know some of you, I've had conversations, reservations, concern, joy about this event, and when we say this blessing, which I can, and blessing, I'm not going to say it for you, but we're a long-awaited event has arrived, and we've done something for the very first time, and we're all in this community together. So in that spirit, I see you all as friends and family. So thank you all so much. So to answer your question, I go back to, I have a really good friend, Basharat. He's like my brother from another mother. His name is Joshua Lesser. Josh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody out there knows Josh. He's a rabbi emeritus from a synagogue in Atlanta, and we've been friends for well over 25 years or so. And we met in this interesting kind of way. I was his personal trainer. And one day we kept inviting me to his synagogue, and I was like, I don't know. I was raised in a very non-religious household. And so one day I took him up on it, and it happened to be we're having a Hanukkah celebration. And what I'll say about that night that I went, it was probably the first religious community I had ever been in where people were showing up as themselves. So it was, so I'm an introvert, so the person who invited me was busy, so I had to figure out how to navigate that space. And there was a helper dog named Champ, who was sort of eating the latke crumbs under the pews, and people were adjusting themselves as the service was going on, and there was children dancing, and just all this activity. And I think the reason it stayed in my mind so much was I didn't understand a word of the service, and so I had to completely focus. And it was the first time I had been in any Jewish space where I saw everybody in that space getting what they needed from the service. And so here I am 20 plus years later, a rabbi that I came from a community that was, at that time open. It was a gay founded synagogue. There were queer Jews and Black Jews and straight Jews. And that I hold on to that feeling even all these years later. And I'm sad to say that feeling has not been replicated in many Jewish spaces that I've been in, but I still hold on to it. Because I do believe that across our difference, it is important for us to be together as a community. And this week's Torah portion, I'm a rabbi, I have to bring the Torah portion, is Vayekel Pikudei. And the Torah portion begins, Vayekel Moshe Adat Yisrael. The community came together to build the Mishkan. You're finishing the building of the Mishkan. And the building of the Mishkan could never happen if a diversity of people didn't come together to build it. They brought all their gifts. I'm sure they were all arguing, but they came together as a community. And the Mishkan, the holy place, would not have been built. And the Torah says, once the Mishkan was built, that's when God's presence showed up.
Thank you for that, Sandra. On that subject, my next question is to all of you.
I could just, I think just listening to the reference to the Torah portion, yes. I mean, it's also obviously, last week's Torah portion was Kitisa, right, which is the Torah portion of the golden calf.
Yes, yes, right? Yes.
So even more extraordinary, right, that you can have this voluntary communal gathering, building a home for the Shekhinah, for the presence of God in the midst of the people after maybe the most traumatic and divisive, right? Because the Levites are called to declare war on the rest of the Jewish people as to punish them for having worshipped the golden calf. So if Bnei Israel can go through that experience and then come together and build the Mishkan, right? It just shows that actually it's possible to come together even after the most painful of traumas and divisions.
And I got one more to add, one more to add to this. So I love this. So when Moses came down, and I do think of the Mel Brooks scene where I don't know if you guys know it, I have 13 or 10 because he drops the commandments. So when Moses comes down to deliver the 10 Commandments to the Israelites, they don't know what he's been doing up there for 40 years. And so they get afraid and they build this golden calf. And then he comes down, he drops or throws the 10 Commandments, and he goes back up the mountain. He could have quit. Like, he could have been like, I want nothing to do with these people. But he goes up there and he pleads the case. And the rabbis of our tradition say that in the Ark of the Covenant, the broken tablets and the whole tablets are together. So the broken and the whole are sacred, and they must be together to form the whole and the community.
Peter?
It's okay, let's take out. I don't monopolize everything.
Okay. Well, let's build the Mishkan for the 21st century. I was going to ask the audience if they were familiar with the term Ashkenormativity. Anybody know what that is? Raise your hand. Okay, a few of you, not a lot. What Ashkenormativity is, it's the centering of white identifying culture of Eastern European immigrants as the standard in Jewish American life. And so I want to do the opposite, and in rapid fire fashion, maybe for the next couple of minutes, I want you guys to start with your own Jewish identities and then name all the other ones that make up our Jewish tapestry here in the States. Maybe with an emphasis of ones that don't get attention in mainstream spaces. So, Sandra, I'll start.
Yeah, I'll just start. I'll just start with my own. Like I think sometimes people they see me. So I track as a Black person before I'll ever track as a rabbi, before I'll track as a Jew. That's just the reality of my life, and because of that, people may not understand or know that I come from a military family. I was a military person myself. I worked in law enforcement. I carry the identity of a Black person, a queer person, a Jewish person, a woman, and that's how I see the world. I can't separate them out, and we all have variety of identities, and there's also a lot of Jews, Mizrahi Jews who came from Northern Africa. We have, as Mark said, Ashkenazi Jews that immigrated here from Eastern Europe. Then we also have Sephardic Jews who immigrated here from Spain. There's a whole tapestry of Jews that we often don't think of that make up the Jewish people.
Yeah, it's funny, my experience in some ways is really different. Given the way I present, I walk into, your average synagogue. Even places where sometimes I feel like if they knew my political views, they knew what, I'd written, I might be unpopular, but if they don't know that, I walk in and I just blend right in, particularly in the Orthodox community. And I think that it gives me a kind of a privilege that I sometimes take for granted, that I can choose when I want to express myself on my terms and when I want to be, kind of diverge for people. But I can also decide to keep that entirely quiet and bury that if I want to, because it's not shown, in the way I look. And I have noticed over the years as I've been writing that I often find people react much more harshly to people who look more like Sandra than who look like me, even when we're saying the same things, because I don't come across in the way I present as threatening, And so I try to think, and I think it also plays out not only in Jewish spaces, but I've noticed that it plays out vis-a-vis Jews and Palestinians too. But I also noticed that Palestinians often get, they receive a much harsher reaction, oftentimes when they're saying things that are the same things that I would say, that it's easier oftentimes for people to put someone like me out there to say these things, right, than a Palestinian or a Black person or many other people who have maybe a more threatening identity. So I kind of carry that around. I wish I could say I thought about it all the time. I often don't. I often just kind of keep it in my pocket and take it for granted. I take it for granted that I go into synagogues where women don't have the same roles that men have. But I try to challenge myself to remember that and to try to think about, if I have this unearned privilege, what am I doing with it? Am I doing something with it that might hopefully create a little bit more space for other people?
All right, thank you. We did some of that more to
Yeah.
let you go, but thank you for that. Last personal style question about Jewish community. So I'd love for you guys to share a time you felt especially embraced, held, or accepted by the Jewish community, and then give me the other. Describe a time where you felt pushed out, or out in the cold. Said we started with you last time, Peter. I'll put you on the spot.
I mean, I think that, when I think about the community in which I live, the shul that I have been part of for, more than a decade, and then the shul before that, places where my political views are not in the mainstream at all. I think the first thing that I think about was, when we had kids, and then these people just started showing up with food day after day after day. I sometimes joke with people that, like, in that circumstance, given how overwhelmed and frazzled, I probably would have signed up to almost any political ideology if it came with basically people just showing up and bringing food for every single meal. It was just, there was a kind of a, and then again when my father died, and I needed the minyan every day, multiple times a day. I needed it during COVID. It was challenging, and people made it work, and there was a sense of commitment and solidarity, and the thickness of intercommunal bonds that's very, very, very powerful to me at times when I really needed that. I would say, to me, one of the things that I really struggle with is the way in which sometimes the very beauty of that inward-looking sense of care and sense of solidarity within the group can also coincide. The flip side of it can be, I think, a lack of sense of obligation for people who are outside of the group. Sometimes I worry that, like, the tighter the bonds of the group loyalty, the more it means that people don't actually take responsibility outside for people who don't look like them. And I would say, for me, so the most painful things I think were, and this is actually kind of the germ of what led me to write my book, was in the Jewish spaces that I was part of after October 7th. It was this incredibly powerful mourning process of the Israelis who had been killed and who had been taken captive. And I felt like especially people were very intent to make sure that people did not just see these people as names and numbers, but that we were always told the story. Every day, every Shabbat, there was someone would read a paragraph or two about one of the people who was in captivity, and people were coming, relatives were coming, and I felt like there was this very powerful humanization, so that we would have a sense of the magnitude of what had been lost when 1,200 Israelis were killed and 200 large Israelis were taken captive. And then, week after week after week, when there was no reckoning at all with the Palestinians who were being killed, and even when there was some fleeting reference, I never ever heard in a mainstream Jewish space that I was part of the name of a Palestinian who had been killed, anything about their story and who they were, something that would humanize them. And I felt like this contrast between the intense humanization of Jews and the lack of any effort to kind of humanize Palestinians, to me, made me feel like an outsider, because it made me feel like the beautiful tension that exists within Judaism between it being a religion with a universal message, right? The first people we encounter in Torah are not Jews, Israelites. They're not proto-Jews or Israelites. Adam, Eve, the generation of Noah, the generation of the Tower of Babel, they're universal human beings. So there's clearly a message that all human beings are created in the image of God. And then we have the Jewish story, which starts with Abraham and the covenant. And I felt like, for me, I've always found that part of what the power of Judaism is the tension between the idea that we are a people which imagines ourselves as a kind of extended family, B'nai Israel, the children of Israel, right? We do imagine ourselves having quasi-familial obligations, but we're not just a tribe. We also have a universal message for all people. And it was in those moments that I felt that balance was lost. It was broken for me in a certain way, and that made me feel like an outsider.
I was gonna tell a different story, but listening to you, I'm almost crying because you don't know why I'm almost crying. But so, my mother died during COVID, and that was really, really hard. Well, I'm gonna cry. Um, because the whole system had shut down. And I'm not like things that are supposed to work didn't work. For example, my brother and I had decided to cremate my mother. There was no urns, we had to wait because the funeral home was backed up, and the funeral director was so amazing, like dealing with us. Um, and I remember when my rabbi, Joshua Lesser, he's like, "Are you gonna do Shiva?" And I said, "How?" Like, I didn't even understand, like, how to do that. And he said, "We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it." And I remember I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was show up at a Zoom. That's all I had to do. And there was like hundreds of people there. And I think that we do death very well. And then for the rest of the year, I would just turn on my phone on Instagram or TikTok, I don't remember which one, and I would say, "I need a minion." And people would always come but from everywhere. People I didn't even know. So like that is the moment, like when I felt completely held by the Jewish community.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Need a moment for
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Whew. I had a long transition to the next section. I'm just going to sit for a second. We're going to move into the next phase. And thank you so much, Sandra and Peter. Thank you. Tissues. I'll let you guys know when we run out of water too, okay? What I'd like to move us next toward is a discussion around Jewish safety and Jewish discomfort. So I'll skip a long intro. I'll start with this article. It was published in the Forward last year, actually, on October 7th, 2025. And it describes Jewish life on the campus of Elon University, which is just outside of Greensboro, my hometown. And we also bring up Elon University as a good example because Rabbi Sandra, you served there as an associate chaplain for Jewish life for a number of years. Elon University received one of only 2 A ratings from the Anti-Defamation League's inaugural campus rankings last year. It also received an A rating from the watchdog group Stop Anti-Semitism, and it was reviewed favorably by a very large Facebook group called Mothers Against College Anti-Semitism. 60,000 college, mothers of college-age children really love Elon, which is good to know. Let me quote a little bit from the article. What's surprising is that Elon does almost none of the things that these groups, ADL, Anti-Stop Anti-Semitism, others, including the Trump administration, insist is necessary to keep Jewish students safe. The school hasn't amped up student discipline or mandated special anti-Semitism trainings for the community, hasn't banned slogans, scaled back its diversity programs, or adopted a definition of anti-Semitism that includes strident protest against the war in Gaza. The school has instead focused almost its entire response to October 7th on education and civility, leveraging a long-standing obsession with student satisfaction born decades ago from an expansion plan that relied on tuition dollars rather than an Ivy League endowment to head off some campus conflicts over Israel before they begin, sometimes literally by asking nicely, while avoiding limitations on freedom of expression that other universities have found necessary to achieve the same effect. Peter, you've spent a good deal of time analyzing Columbia University, and famously not a place that received rave reviews for managing concerns of anti-Semitism, and you paid particular attention following the encampments. So with that table setting, Sandra, I'd love for you to unpack the experience or the approach at Elon first, and then Peter, you're on deck to see how that approach might have worked at Columbia, or if it wouldn't have worked, why?
So, Elon is an interesting campus. And in many ways, it doesn't fit any of the stereotypes of what a school that had fewer incidents of anti-Semitism. It's in a rural part of North Carolina, so the students are isolated. And so, like, the college does a very good job of, like, since there's no entertainment outside, of making sure the university has the students have a lot of entertainment. Most of the students pay full tuition. They do have an endowment, I don't remember the number, and depending on who you talk to, around 12 to 30% of the student body is Jewish, and most of whom come from the Northeast, some from Los Angeles, some from Atlanta, and then a few from the Midwest, but most of them come from the Northeast. And the climate of the campus, which was, I believe, started by the first university chaplain, Jan Fuller, is there are moments on campus where there's no classes, but they come together for community conversation. So, like, there's one day, I'll just say it's Tuesday, and so, like, the whole, like, quad area that's filled with student clubs and donuts and coffee, and so there's faculty, students out there interacting, but there's no classes. And then there's another day that used to be like chaplain, whatever, when the university stopped being a Christian school, they use that for community conversation. So, like, people come to the chapel if they want to hear a speaker talk about whatever the topic is, and there's music, but there's no classes. And so I'm saying all this to say that prior to October 7th, the school already had this culture of having conversations so students can get to know each other. Another thing that they do is all students have access to all clubs. So if you were a non-Jewish student and you want access to Hillel, all you have to do is ask, and then you can put on the list, and then your card can go into the Hillel Center. And the students love this because there's often, like, joint programming with, like, the Catholic Student Union or the Black Student Union. And now there's, like, a really active, like, Black Jewish Student Union, am I saying that right? On campus, and in that union, there's also Black Jews in that student body. And so when, by the time October 7th happened, I had long left, but I had some conversations with the current rabbi, the current people who work in Jewish life, and the chaplains. And so October 7th was challenging for them, but they just kept doing what they've always done. And when I saw someone from Schuster told me about the campus climate survey, I wasn't surprised that Elon got an A. I'm just glad that everybody else knows how great the campus is.
I have spent some time at Columbia, and I also spent a lot of other, time at other campuses around the time of the encampments and before and after. I think that there were absolutely, incidents of genuine anti-Semitism that happened. There was also another set of incidents where I think that students were, people made assumptions about students' views about Israel because they were Jewish. There was a conflation of being Jewish and being supportive of Israel that I think also crossed the line into quite problematic territory. That's a larger subject that I think the American Jewish community really has to really think about in terms of how we deal with this, because I think the organized American Jewish community is in this contradictory position of demanding that people who don't like Israel make a clear distinction between Israel and Jews, right? So it is not appropriate to come up to someone because they're wearing a kippah and say, "Free Palestine," right? It's not. The fact that they're wearing a kippah has nothing to do with what their views about Palestine are, right? It's not a political statement. It's the same, and yet that same organized American Jewish community also often says something along the lines of that to be a Zionist, to support Israel, is inherent in being Jewish, right? So the American Jewish Council often tends to conflate these things, even as they rightly get upset when people who don't like Israel, who don't like Zionism, conflate them. That was another category. But I would say I actually read a lot of the anti-Semitism reports that were done at Columbia and Penn, at Harvard and UCLA. And the single biggest set of incidents that you find actually in these reports are basically incidents of social exclusion, in which students who are supportive of Israel basically feel like they're made to feel like they don't belong. They're basically, in various different ways, it's made clear to them that they are very, very unpopular on campus. And I think a lot of the trauma that's actually been experienced by some Jewish students on campus is this whiplash that has happened in progressive spaces over a fairly short period of time, where when their parents went to these universities, you were be proudly pro-Israel and no one gave you any, no one gave you any trouble for it, right? But now at a lot of these universities, these more left-leaning universities, to be openly supportive of Israel is like being a Republican, It's like being anti-abortion, right? You are going to find yourself in a small minority, and a lot of people are going to think that your views are immoral. And I think that sense of exclusion was extremely problematic for a lot of students. And I take that, and I think the trauma and a sense of is extremely painful for a lot of students. But I don't think that the correct answer to that was to restrict the free speech rights of students who were involved in pro-Palestinian efforts. Partly, ironically, a lot of the students who ended up getting suspended or even expelled or beaten up by the police in the name of keeping Jewish students safe were also Jewish, right? Because in that generation, there's a very, very wide ideological spectrum. Jewish students in many of these schools were overrepresented in the encampments. I mean, when Columbia suspended the group Jewish Voice for Peace, the Anti-Defamation League put out a tweet thanking Columbia's president for keeping Jewish students safe. But they had just suspended a Jewish organization, right? When the Dartmouth College called in the New Hampshire police to break up the encampment, they ended up zip tying and hurling to the ground and injuring the former head of the Jewish Studies program, right? And the Anti-Defamation League in New England thanked the president of Dartmouth for creating a culture of safety, right? So I think that these were not the right kind of responses to this sense of social exclusion that a lot of Jewish students face. And I think what would have been better is to do something more like Elon did, which is say, we are an educational institution, right? Our job is to introduce people to painful and difficult subjects that may challenge the kinds of things that they grew up with. So if you grew up in a family that had very, very certain kinds of views about abortion and LGBT rights, you will be confronted with ideas that challenge you. And if you're a student who grew up in a very pro-Israel environment, it is correct for the university to give you the opportunity to learn about a Palestinian perspective. And similarly, the students who come to campus from a very, very anti-Zionist background should be given the opportunity and encouraged to try to understand why the majority of Jews in the world very much believe in the importance of the state of Israel and associated with their safety. And I think that approaching this from as an educational problem, in which you make a clear distinction between the fact that education can bring intellectual challenge and discomfort, and embrace that while also making it clear that students have the right to be physically safe. I feel like that's where Columbia and some other universities went wrong in my view.
Maybe a quick follow-up to that. Do Elon and Columbia have competing understandings of Jewish safety or Jewish discomfort? These are such opposite almost policies. So I'm wondering what conclusions we can draw from that difference, or how the situation is approached.
I mean, I'll just add, I don't know if they have, I think a spotlight was put on these Ivy League institutions that was all completely politically based, in my opinion. And I think that contributed to the attention, contributed to their responses. I still have this vivid image of these presidents, all of whom were women, one of them being a Black woman, and Congress members like yelling at them. And Elon, which is a small school, about 8,000 students, is in rural North Carolina, we're not to that. So I think that also just to add to that climate was happening.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important, the point you're making, that, I mean, there were some Jewish students on these campuses who had a lot of, who really felt failed by the university. That's true. But I don't think that was the majority of Jewish students. I think that a lot, the pressure that these universities came under to, ban groups like Students Just for Palestine, to discipline various professors, to put in very, very draconian kind of rules about protest. I think we're not coming primarily from Jewish students on those campuses at all. They were coming partly from alums who felt like they were partly coming from politicians, and I think that there were a lot of people who had pre-existing reasons to be hostile to these universities, who used this as an excuse to do that, right? So one of the things you noticed was, particularly in that hearing, was often the association of anti-Semitism with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And I think, to be honest, some of those people called the universities anti-Semitic because it was easier to say anti-Semitic than what they really wanted to say, which is they felt these universities were anti-white. This became a way for them to push back against a whole series of changes at the universities, in which the universities were, I would say, questioning very deep-seated, fundamental kind of ideas about the virtue of the United States, right? Or the virtue of the traditional family, or things that were extremely uncomfortable for a lot of people. And then you have Donald Trump coming along, right? And for Donald Trump, right? I mean, remember the guy who had dinner with Nick Fuentes, right? It's the guy who said that, who's basically who's trafficked in so many anti-Semitic stereotypes over the course of his career. I think for Donald Trump, the problem with universities was the same problem that was the problem with independent media, with independent law firms, right? Donald Trump, any institutions that weren't under his control were a problem. And universities create dissent against centers of power. And so the Trump administration wanted to try to take control over these universities, just like it wanted to take control of the Federal Reserve, and they deployed a number of different justifications for this. But the anti-Semitism justification was a particularly effective one for basically saying, we're going to come in and tell you how to teach and determine basically the rules that exist on your campus. And to me, the fact that I think the vast majority of Jews on those campuses wanted no part of this, right? But the fact that this got a fair amount of support from some major American Jewish organizations, to me, was a tragedy. To see, given how important independent universities have been to the American Jewish story, to our flourishing, and how important they are to liberal democracy, to see groups like the Anti-Defamation League be willing to essentially get in bed with the Trump administration as the Trump administration tries to impose a kind of authoritarian control that limits the independence of universities, to me, was really something that was tragic to watch.
So just to add to that, Sherry Brown, who is a wonderful teacher and has written a lot of pieces on anti-Semitism on the right and the left. And I'm trying to remember what organization she runs, and it's lost. But she wrote in a piece years ago, how can you tell when we're in a moment of anti-Semitism? And her response is basically when Jews are being used as a cudgel and a wedge. And so when that hearing that we're talking about, and today watching the Jewish community being used as a wedge in our political discourse, we are in a moment of heightened anti-Semitism.
We discussed how higher education is potentially meeting this moment. I want to shift us to see how the Jewish establishment is meeting the same moment. Another audience questions. How many recognize the name Mahmoud Khalil? Can you raise your hands? Okay, more so than Ashken activity. I mentioned Mahmoud Khalil because last year, 18 North Carolina rabbis wrote a Passover message calling on the Trump administration to stop the practice of illegally detaining foreign-born students. Mahmoud Khalil was one of the first people to be snatched off the street by Trump's ICE agents. Rabbi Lawson was one of the 18 signatories to that letter. That message was published in the Raleigh News and Observer, and a sign-on letter in support of the rabbis received over 200 signatures from clergy statewide. Who did not sign that letter? Institutional Jewish or mainstream Jewish institutions throughout the state. So I won't name them, but the question that I want to ask you, pose to you, with this, again, table setting, is, are concerns around Jewish safety that we just discussed responsible for the apparent hesitation on the part of mainstream Jewish institutions to advocate more forcefully around immigration, for example, or other issues that the Jewish community has traditionally been very vocal on?
Who do you want to start?
Let's start with Sam.
Can you repeat that last part?
Sure, yeah. The question is, are concerns around Jewish safety responsible for the apparent hesitation on the part of mainstream Judaism to advocate more forcefully for immigration and other traditional issues where we are addressed with?
Yeah, so I think what I will say right now, tomorrow my answer will be different. In my opinion, and we were talking about this earlier, is that the ADL has ceded its responsibility as a civil rights organization. And without the ADL, or without a civil rights organization, we don't have a dedicated Jewish response in the way that we would have had if the ADL hadn't done it. So when I think about Jews speaking, it's like when immigration enforcement descended on our state, y'all showed up, folks showed up because we don't want our neighbors being taken. But there was an absence of a civil rights response. There was no ADL or someone else. There was no ADL saying we must protect immigrants like they would have in the past. Without the ADL, we lose memory. We will lose memory of how to show up in moments like this. We will forget, or if you didn't know, like during the civil rights era, the largest amount of rabbis were arrested in August 4th, like 16, 17, like one thing says 17, one says 16. But they did that because they listened to the ADL, Heschel, and King. And so I think as someone who, even though I've worked in mainstream organizations, I'm still saddened by the lack of response by some, not all, but by some sort of legacy institutions. And I think part of that, I do think part of it is a concern for donors, just concern for constituents, not sure what constituents might say. And also, there is some racism attached to that. I still hear people will ask me or say things to me believing that Black people are somehow more anti-Semitic than white folks. That is a real thing. That's a real question I get on a regular basis. And I think that there's also the idea, but some in the Jewish community feel like, well, they have abandoned us, so we must isolate and we must take care of ourselves. But history has continued to show us that for us to survive or for us to be safe, safety means we have to be in relationship with other people. And we have, like, our liberation is found up with other people. And we can't do this stuff by ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are rabbis who are doing really, really extraordinary things in this moment. In Minneapolis, a lot of people from all over the country went. It was really extraordinary. But I think if you look at the American kind of establishment Jewish organizations, and you compare them to the way those organizations, some of the same organizations, the Anti-Defamation League, for instance, the American Jewish Committee, were acting in the middle of the 20th century, in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. I think you see a radically different relationship to American democracy. The core idea of the American Jewish establishment in the middle of the 20th century was that if American Jews supported the Black freedom struggle, which was essentially a struggle to make America a multiracial democracy, that Jews that would be an act of enlightened self-interest for Jews, because if they succeeded, then that would mean that Jews also move towards being fully equal citizens, right? And in fact, it was true, right? And it's not coincidental that a lot of the last vestiges of these kind of institutionalized anti-Semitism, law firms, and various forms of businesses, country clubs, really come down in the 60s and 70s, in the wake of the civil rights movement, right? And today, by contrast, so in the 50s and 60s, American Jewish organizations are looking at politicians, and they're asking the question: do these politicians support American democracy or not? Right? In terms of deciding whether they are people that the Jewish community should support or not. That's not the lens through which the most powerful American Jewish organizations look at politics today. The fundamental question I ask is: does this politician unconditionally support Israel? If that politician unconditionally supports Israel, they are essentially an ally, irrespective of whether they try to overturn the last election, irrespective of whether they want to actually allow America to continue to have free and fair elections in this country, right? And if you're on the wrong side of that question, if you're considered too harsh a critic of Israel, then it doesn't matter that you might be someone who's actually on the front lines of trying to protect American democracy. And that, to me, is really, really been very, very disturbing to watch. I mean, the Anti-Defamation League, sorry to keep mentioning them, but they have a whole special project to monitor the Mamdani administration, right? Because Mamdani is a very, very harsh critic of Israel. He's even, you could call him an anti-Zionist. I mean, he has, by American standards, very radical views on the question of Israel. But why is there no corresponding Anti-Defamation League effort vis-a-vis the Trump administration, right? I mean, does the Trump administration pose less of a threat? The only way you can think the Trump administration poses less of a threat to American Jews is if you think the safety and well-being of American Jews is disconnected from the survival of American democracy, right? And that seems to be a crazy, crazy notion, right? And now we're actually seeing the consequences of, I think, this not only immoral but profoundly foolish decision, right? Because you have organizations that basically decided that they were going to, in the second Trump term in particular, not say anything when Trump calls Somali people garbage, right? Not say things when he's blatantly transphobic, blatantly Islamophobic, blatantly racist, right? And it's often couched in this language of like, well, they weren't there for us, so basically screw them, right? What they weren't there for us, by the way, means usually is that at some point they came out for a ceasefire in Gaza, right? And so then you say, okay, our theory is that we can allow the Republican Party to indulge in the most crude and naked Islamophobia, misogyny, trans and homophobia, and nativism, right? But it won't get to us. We can build a firewall, right? And they won't be anti-Semitic, right? And what we have seen, particularly in the last year, is the Republican Party under Trump has bust completely through that firewall, which was eminently predictable, right? We know that these bigotries travel together, and they say it openly. If you listen to Nick Fuentes, right, who's one of the most powerful figures on the American right today, right? Basically, a neo-Nazi. What Fuentes said explicitly is, wait a second. In the Republican Party, I can say anything I want about Muslims, and I can say anything I want about Black people, and anything I want about LGBT people. And you're saying I can't say anything I want about Jewish people, right? He basically saw the hypocrisy in this, and he's driven a truck through it, right? And I think there was a profound wisdom in the way the American Jewish community operated in the middle of the 20th century in seeing that our safety was bound up with the safety of other vulnerable communities and in the deepening of American democracy. And there's a profound, I think, an extremely dangerous foolishness in the attempt now to essentially make a separate peace with an authoritarian, white Christian supremacist political party in the hopes that that will keep you safe.
And so, I want to just add, not take away from anything you just said, but I'm just going to add, I think another piece of the puzzle And particularly when you look at Jews in the the early and middle part of the 20th century, when those folks came here, either, where the memory of the Holocaust, escaping Nazism, and the memory of the Holocaust is alive and well, and they come here, and it's blatantly obvious to those folks how Black people are being treated. And the further we move away from the memory of the Holocaust and the need for Jews during that time period to assimilate. So Jews were living in urban areas, Jews were living in proximity to other immigrant folks and also in proximity to black folks. And then assimilation, moving further out into the suburbs and assimilating into whiteness culture. I think that also adds to what Peter was
You guys mentioned ADL a few times. I was going to do the same. I'll add a couple of things, like JFNA president encouraging followers to not call out the Trump administration on its very problematic view of anti-Semitism. You guys talked about the ADL stepping back from its historic mission of fighting racism alongside anti-Semitism. To bring it back home to North Carolina, these things coexist with things like the Shalom Act, which was signed into law by Governor Cooper at the time, and along with anti-BDS laws across the country, which also use aggressive and weaponized definitions of anti-Semitism to restrict speech. You mentioned ADL as the organization that could be, we should be looking to fight for immigration rights or immigration
Okay,
justice.
we're doing it, but they used to.
Yeah, but I also didn't see a lot of congregations step up. People from the congregations, individual rabbis, but not congregations themselves. So my question is, looking at institutional, mainstream Jewish institutions, legacy institutions, are they failing us at this moment? Are they betraying the Jewish values that they were created to uphold and protect?
So I'm not a congregational rabbi, so I can't really speak to that. And I also want to say too, for those who didn't know, I used to work for the ADL, so I'm somebody who used to highly believe in the mission of the ADL. So I am heartbroken to see the direction that they are going. And also, I think part of the challenge of what we're seeing in congregation also goes back to what I was saying before, when many synagogues now are in the suburbs and not touched or not witnessing some of the things that are happening in urban areas. And I think there's also, it is really hard to be a congregational rabbi right now. I'm blessed to know some rabbis who've been in their congregations for 20 years or more. And that is becoming a rarity. There are sometimes, I think, ridiculous litmus tests put on rabbis. And rabbis, you're talking about a human being that has their own values, holding a container of a community that might be 200 or 300 families, and navigating that, staying true to their values, and also getting a lot of push from congregants and from board members. And also, they're also trying to hold on to their job. And I'm not trying to make excuses, I'm just trying to create a broader picture of people. And so there's a lot of stress that was put on rabbis before October 7th, and I think that has made it even more difficult for rabbis right now. Whether or not those rabbis are failing, I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because I think there's a lot going on, and I want to, as a rabbi, I think that all rabbis who are congregational rabbis, many of them are doing the best that they can, and often that means sometimes disappointing many people on the spectrum of politics.
I mean, I would just add that I think one of the things that has changed in American Jewish life over the last half century is something which has changed in the United States over the half century, which is that the United States has become a radically more unequal society, right? That such a vastly, extremely disproportionate amount of the wealth that's been created in the United States over the last 50 years has gone to a very, very small number of people. And I think that really has huge implications for the way institutions run. I mean, I've joked with rabbis more than once about basically saying the idea of what kind of talking about what would happen if they said in public some of the things they believe in private about how Israel is treating Palestinians. And I've heard, and they'll say, well, people would leave. And I remember in one conversation, they said, yeah, but would some people come too? You know, because there are other people who actually, and then this person kind of smiled and he said, yeah, but they would be a different kind of person who was coming, right? Basically, like the people who will leave are people who are more likely to be the people who write big threats, you know? I think that as American Jews, as America has become more and more oligarchic, I think more and more American Jewish institutions have been captured by small numbers of very, very large donors. And not all, you know, of those large donors lean to the right. There's ideological diversity. But if you're thinking about the kind of people who are most naturally likely to be thinking about questions of social justice, billionaires are less likely to think in those terms, right? And I think that's part of what has skewed the American Jewish agenda away from some of these questions about the material well-being. It's actually amazing, just a small story. Most of the Jewish organizations in New York were extremely hostile to Armand Ghazi, right? And you know, depicted him as a grave threat. It's interesting. The most powerful Jewish group by far that endorsed Mamdani was not a left-wing organization. It was the Satmar Hasidim. The Satmar endorsed Mamdani, developed a very close relationship together. And there's an extraordinary interview, which I'd really encourage you to read, by basically the political leader of the Satmar. And he says, basically, we have a lot of poor people in our country who need the government to look out for them. And when we think about a mayor of New York, what we think is about how the hospital system is going to work for us, right? How the anti-poverty programs are going to work for us, right? And so this guy would never call himself a democratic socialist, but because he's not actually thinking in terms of the needs of people who, you know, of billionaires, he's actually talking about a very working class population. He said, you know, a lot of what Mamdani is talking about with housing could really help us, right? And that's the kind of way that I think that you don't see most Jewish organizations thinking in their relationship to politicians.
Thank you. I think that answer takes us into the last kind of portion of this conversation I want to cover. I will say, who knew that we would be running wrong on these conversations? Certainly not I. We have a Q&A that we wanted to hold, so I don't want to shrink too much of that time. So I'll try to keep the questions brief and try to, again, give us room for that. But I want to talk about the power dynamics within the Jewish community. And you mentioned politics. Not great surprise that about 70% of Jews identify or vote within the Democratic Party, and I think the state's no exception. We have something that's unique, I think, in our state Democratic Party, in that there's two Jewish affiliated organizations, and one of them is, it comes down practically, you know, believes on opposing sides of the Israel-Palestine issue. We have the Jewish Caucus, an ardent defender of Israel, and the group also promotes an IRA definition of anti-Semitism. We're supporters of the Shalom Act. We also have the Jewish Democrats, who are part of the North Carolina Dems for Palestinian Lives Coalition, which is working to erect the Palestinian human rights plank in North Carolina. Hey, that was the time, right? So we have these two kind of groups representing wings of the Jewish community, but it's taking place very explicitly within the political environment. So my question to you is, what do you make of this? What are the implications of the Jewish communal divide spilling out so directly into state-led politics? Is this good for our community? Is it bad? In between? Help us make sense.
I'm not, you know, you all know much more about what's happening in North Carolina than me, but I think this seems to me a symptom of the larger division that's taking place among American Jews, which is to say that for a long period of time, Israel was considered the thing that united American Jews, and it doesn't unite American Jews. in the same way that it did generations ago. It's actually the site of very, very, very bitter division. And I think fundamentally, the reason is, I think there was always a kind of ticking time bomb at the heart of the American Jewish political story. And it was the contradiction between the idea that in the United States, Americans want a government that gives everybody equality under the law, irrespective of their race, religion, sex, ethnicity. Whereas in Israel, many of those same, when it comes to Israel, many of those same people actually believe in the idea of a state that gives superior legal rights to Jews over Palestine, right? Basically, that to suggest that the same principle that they want in the United States should be the principle that governs Israel-Palestine is actually horrifying, right? And I think a younger generation of American Jews have picked up on that contradiction, especially as America has more and more leaders who explicitly want America to be an ethno-state itself, right? And many of them have seen Israel as a kind of a model, right? Yeah, great, you have your Jewish state, we'll have our white Christian state. And I think that has been what has exploded this apparent consensus. And I think to me, I would hope that the thing that can bind American Jews, that we can go back to thinking about what can be the things that connect us, are Jewish texts, right? I mean, they hit much, much older and deeper than this state, whatever you think about it, right? Is a tradition of rabbinic Judaism in which Jews have engaged and argued with texts for millennia, right? And it seems to me it seems to me an investment in our re-engagement with those texts, with Torah, with Talmud, and asking the question of what can these texts help us to understand about what it means to be a meaningful life is, I think, a much more solid foundation for a basis of something that we share as Jews. And it is extremely, I would say, disturbing and dispiriting to me to so often see in Jewish spaces that the test of whether you're a Jew in good standing, right, is not whether you observe Shabbat, not whether you keep kosher, not whether you visit the sick, not whether you wash the bodies of the dead, not whether you visit the bereaved, not whether you give tzedakah, right, but whether you unconditionally support Israel, right? This seems to be part of this way in which we have turned the state into a kind of an idol, right? Yeah. In which it's the state that's the object of worship. And I think it's had very, very serious consequences, but I think now in some ways we have an opportunity to actually say, in Judaism, we don't worship states, right? We may think states are necessary, but they are not sacrosanct. They are always subject to criticism, right? And I'll end with this, but you know, Yeshayahu Leibovitz, one of my heroes, the great Orthodox Israeli social critic, was asked whether he believed Israel had a right to exist as a Jewish state. And his answer was, no state has a right to exist. Human beings have a right to exist because they're created in the image of God. States are simply instruments for the protection of human life and human flourishing. They have conditional value, but never unconditional value. Their value is always directly related to how well they are serving human beings that live within them. And when I see a Jewish community that seems to care more about the idea of preserving this particular Israeli political system and its right to exist than the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza who've been killed, it seems to me they've lost sight of that basic idea that Leibovitz had.
Seems like you took us back to last week's tour portion a little bit with the golden calf. But thank you for bringing us back there, because my last question is going to be to you, Sandra. Speaking of historic texts, this isn't the first time that this division has happened to us. So for you guys as well, several times throughout our history. Give us some rabbinic wisdom. How have we gotten out of this jam before?
You know, what's interesting is, you know, yeah, the two things come to mind when I hear that question. I think about something people don't realize how much tension exists in the Jewish community around interfaith marriage. Like that was a huge tension point. But, you know, from our text, from our tradition, you know, we like to tell folks, rabbis like to tell folks, you know, well, after the Second Temple was destroyed, we stopped being a sacrificial tradition, And Rabbinic Judaism was born. That's the story we tell. And it was actually way more complicated than that. The Second Temple was destroyed, and people were like, what are we supposed to do? There were some people that were, I'm just going to sit here and wait for the Third Temple. There were some people that were running around talking about, let's create a new version called Rabbinic Judaism. And there was other people who were like, I'm not going to subscribe to Rabbinic Judaism. And those different fractions, some of those like ancestors of those people are still around, but there was infighting, and eventually the stream that we follow today became Rabbinic Judaism. And there have been multiple points in our history where there have been tension points, and we have somehow managed to get through them, but we get through them by staying together. And you can't get through difficult conversations if you don't have conversations, and if you stay in your little shuttle and just stick with people who think like you. In order for us to grow let me back up a minute. Depending on which study you look at, we are 2% or less of the American population. We can't afford to continue to fight and separate and to not get along with each other or not be in community. We can be in community through difference. We can be in community and we can pray and we can still have our differences but stay together. But today, sadly, there are some people that might say, well, you are critical of the state of Israel, so therefore you're not a good Jew. And also, I've seen other communities right now that are saying, well, if you're not critical of Israel, you can't be in this community. And I do think communities have gates that they might need, but they should be true and honest about what that is. But we are a Jewish people. We've always been a Jewish people, going back to different part to our ports in Project Bo. It says we left as a mixed multitude of people. We left with our poor people, our old people, our young people. A friend of mine, a rabbi, says, well, Rabbi, what about the Israelites that stayed in Mitzrayim? I was like, we never talk about that. I was like, oh, I didn't talk about that. Yes, if some Israelites came, if some Egyptians came with us, it also means is some Israelites chose power over staying in community. And so, one of the things that I hope as we're winding this up, that we learn from this is the importance of being in dialogue, the importance of being in conversation. That's how we grow. It might be uncomfortable, but when I tell people when we are in difficult conversations, stay in it. Trust me, it will get better.
Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
No. I don't want to. I can't top that.
Rabbinic wisdom stays over here. Okay. Well, that's all from my questions. And we did bleed into some of the Q&A time. When we were concepting the Q&A section, we wanted to give the mic to people, but logistically couldn't do that. So we drafted a small focus group of people to submit some questions to us. In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask one from the list with apologies and thanks for the work that went into putting those questions together. I think this is a good way to close us out. We'll start with Peter. One thing that gives you hope.
I was speaking of Columbia University in the spring. Last spring, I went to a protest. There were some students who I knew were going to be protesting. This was actually after Mahmoud Khalil had been taken, and they felt that their university, Columbia, had not protected them. And they were a group of Jewish students, and they had chained themselves to the gate at Columbia University. And they were sitting there for hours and hours, just kind of chained to the gate. And there were two things that I found extremely powerful about this. First of all, these kids knew that Columbia wasn't kidding about the severity of the way they were cracking down, especially given the pressure they were under for the Trump administration. Tons, dozens, maybe even hundreds of Columbia students had been suspended. And these students were, risking a lot. They were really putting their future in peril by doing this. And I also just watching them sitting, it's not really a lot of fun to be chained to a gate for hours and hours and hours. It's not just that you miss class, right? And that it's, but actually, there's like a lot of things that you might want to do, actually, that are hard to do when you're chained to a gate. I was watching these students. We all said, we all davened mincha together in the afternoon. And one of the students in particular, I really struck me because I know this student. He grew up in the West Bank. His father is a rabbi in a Jewish settlement in the West Bank. And this student, because of the relationships that he had formed with Palestinians at Columbia, had moved to the place where he was actually willing to put his own body on the line in order to protect his fellow student, Mahmoud Khalil. And I just thought you know, this is a sign of what's possible in another generation. You know, there is oftentimes we think that things are impossible, right? It might seem that a future in Israel-Palestine where Jews and Palestinians live equally and safely alongside each other is impossible to imagine, right? But there was also a time when it was impossible for many Americans to imagine that we would live in a country in which white soldiers would take orders from black officers, right? And within a generation, the civil rights movement made that so. My family is South African. Into the 1980s, even just a few years before Nelson Mandela was let out of jail, it was inconceivable to the vast, vast majority of white South Africans that there ever could be a free election that would lead to a black president in which South Africa could be a country in which white and black people live together equally under the law. And the anti-apartheid movement made it possible. And so when I saw this kid chained to the gate, I thought, you know, maybe it is his generation, right, that is going to make things that seem impossible now possible in some future, and that gives me hope.
So, you know, there have been a few demographic studies, almost like democracy, demographic studies of the Jewish folks, Jewish people in the United States. And one thing they say a lot of things, and they paint pictures of who we are. But one thing that I've taken away from like the Pew study in 2013 and the Pew study in 2020, another study that's done by Brandeis, and the JCOI study behind the count, is that it consistently shows that Jews under a certain age, what that age is, are very excited and proud to be Jewish. They're excited to be Jewish, they want to be part of the Jewish community. The young folks that we organize with, where I live in the Triangle, they're like, just tell us what to do and what to organize. We just want to hang out together afterwards and have pizza. You know, they want to, and they see organizing as part of their expression of Jewish values. I'm saying this because there's a lot of like rhetoric about younger folks and them not liking their Jewishness or not being excited to be Jewish, but the studies keep showing that they are excited to be Jewish and damn proud to be Jewish. They just express their Judaism in different ways than their parents or grandparents. And last week, I gave a talk at Davidson College in Charlotte, and those students were so excited to talk to me, so excited to talk about their Judaism, so excited for me to learn how excited they are about their Jewishness. And I think this is what gives me hope for all of the other folks that keep saying things like, Judaism is dying, the young folks don't care. But they do. We all just have to listen to them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more round of applause for
Yeah.
Sandra and Peter.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for Peter Beinart, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, and our moderator, Mark Botchkes.
All right, thank you. You guys have been a wonderful audience as well.
I want to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Lisa Forehand, and I am the WNC, the Western North Carolina Community Organizer for Carolina Jews for Justice. So for those of you in the theater from Western North Carolina, I am your person. So have a look and find me. We all heard a lot tonight, and you may be curious You may have felt validated. You may have new hope. You may be mad. At this point, you have only received information, but have not had the chance to process it in your own time, in your own head, or to discuss it with others. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment right here, because things will get foggy and fuzzy as you leave this theater. Take a moment to think of one statement, one exchange that was like an aha moment for you, someone where there was something you didn't know or something that made you think differently. And take a mental note of those aha moments. Now I want you to really crane your necks and look around this room. No, I don't see you all looking. You all are being lazy. Look around the room. If you're in the front, look at the back. If you're in the back, look at the front. This is where the work of healing our community and fighting for justice continues, with us. It's with each other, with the people that you see in this room. You were willing to come to this dialogue. You were willing to be a recipient of this information. And now we hope that you'll take it forward. We applaud the many efforts that are happening in the community thus far to host facilitated conversations about Israel-Palestine and American Jewry. Please continue to participate in those with CJJ or other trusted partners. It's often said in houses of worship that the service has ended, but let your real service begin in the community. Let your humility continue, let the respect continue, let the curiosity ground you in finding and repairing our community. Be on the lookout for emails from Carolina Jews for Justice. We're going to offer a chance to talk about what you heard tonight so that you will have a chance to interact a little bit more. We'd like, again, to thank the countless supporters and volunteers who made this possible. Honestly, there's far too many of you to name, but you know who you are. Some of them are still out keeping us safe, so if you see them, please thank them. If you, please, we can't name everybody, but we're really, really grateful for people who gave their time, made a financial contribution, or for those of you that just decided to show up and spend your evening with us. I invite you to join us in the lobby. Peter is going to quickly get off the stage and get to the book signing. Malaprops has books available, and there'll be some conversation in the house as well. And again, we so appreciate you for coming and sincerely hope that this conversation will plant seeds that we will continue to sow as we work to defend democracy and create a North Carolina where everyone can thrive. Thank you for coming. And let's give them another round of applause. And we'll see you in the lobby.